Welcome to What's Up Wichita. We are here with Mayor Brandon Whipple, who's interviewing City Engineer Gary Janzen about upcoming road construction and bridge repair.
Hey, I'm Mayor Brandon Whipple, and I'm here today with Gary Janzen, who is our city engineer. On this episode, we're talking about one of the topics that, well, we hear from residents the most about, which is our streets. We're going to get into kicking it off with a hot topic and the subject of many media stories a few weeks back and likely a few weeks from now, which is Kellogg. So Gary, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate all the work you do. As mentioned, we get a lot of feedback about streets, and I think folks now can put a face to the person behind the scene, making sure that we continue to have some of the best roads in the country. So we'll just start off with just asking really about your experience with the city, how long you've been here, and what is it that you normally do?
Well, thank you, Mayor, for having me. It just so happens that today I've been with the city for 27 years, so today is my anniversary, January 10th of 1995. So yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I've worked my entire career in the engineering division of Public Works. I started out working in our construction field office, where we oversee all infrastructure projects that get built. So I spent about 11 years there, which was a real benefit to me to get to see how all these things get built. I moved into overseeing our design and project development, and I've been the city engineer for almost 10 years now, since 2012. So I've seen a lot happen during that time, especially, again, getting to see it from the construction and design side both. You know, I always like to tell people that I like what I do so much because of the wide variety of what we do. So I've had the opportunity to be involved with, project delivery and management for road projects, bridge projects, highway interchanges. We've got areas in our community that people that still aren't served by public water or sewer, and a lot of them want to be that way, but sometimes we'll get a request to extend a sewer across the street, right? That might be a project that costs $10,000. We've dealt with projects like that up to $300 million major transportation projects. Also get involved a lot on the utility side of what we do. We've got 5,000 miles of pipe underground between water and sewer, and so we spend a lot of time working with our operations staff, asset management, looking ahead to the future and doing everything it takes to deliver infrastructure projects. We work a lot too with other departments, including Park. We work with library, just about any department that needs contract management or project delivery services. We work with them in establishing a recommended capital improvement program to the city, or to the city council every year, which is a primary resource for funding for these projects. We also provide
we should jump into that just a little bit, because I'm not sure everyone knows what the CIP is, or the Capital Improvement Project, and what that fund actually does. And for someone who tries to explain this to everyday people I see at neighborhood association meetings, it feels like it's separate than the budget, which it is. It's a kind of different budget in itself, but could you explain roughly what the CIP is, if people hear that, and exactly what the expectations of that particular fund?
Sure. So the City of Wichita has a 10-year planning document, a capital improvement program, and you're correct, it's separate from the budget, just like it is for all other communities. Ours is a lot larger in size than most of our regional partners in the area, but over that 10 years, there's a lot of the same departments I talked about. Public Works has got a very large portion of that because of the funds that go into there for transportation improvements, city facilities. City of Wichita has over 600 facilities that they own and maintain. I mentioned the water and sewer. We've got 60-some sewer lift stations. I think everybody's aware that we're building a $500 million new water treatment plant and getting ready to start work on our main sewer treatment plant that's over $350 million. Those types of things are funded and identified in the CIP. If you looked in the streets section, for example, you see a long list of arterial streets that are in there. Once a street is built, typically, well, not typically, it always is, then it becomes the city's to own and maintain, regardless of how it was paid for, if it's a public street. So there's a lot in there, and I know there's an item we're going to talk about here later about our preservation of those streets also. But that CIP is roughly $2 billion in funding over 10 years has been typical. There's funding in there for new fire trucks, just to give you an example. Big equipment for our maintenance of the floodway, Valley Center floodway, which is something that we service Sedgwick County. And so there's a lot of things that go into there, but it's the major purchases, it's the major projects that go into there.
And I think you're hitting on something really important. It's a 10-year plan, while our normal budget's usually just a 1-year plan with the anticipation that the next year will complement it. This is something you can't plan streets 1 year at a time. You can't plan, fire trucks 1 year at a time. You have to look out with a 10-year plan, and that's what this document does.
Absolutely, and because of the size of those expenditures, it helps to look that far out. We usually look and say that the first 5 years typically is where you can count on it probably staying the same. There's a lot of things that can change with the dynamic of the city as it grows that might impact some of those items that are in the CIP. One of the city council's top priorities for a long time has been to leverage outside funding, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things we do, working through the Wichita Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, through KDOT, Federal Highway, is to try to leverage outside funding for transportation improvements in particular. That funding comes about sometimes out of order with the project that's in the CIP, and so we make recommendations ultimately to the council with considerable public engagement during that time to have the council approve, again, that 10-year document. And it's a rolling program. Typically the next year, a lot of the same projects stay the same. But again, when you look at things like the Aquatics Master Plan that was in the works for 10 years, where the City Council allocated over $25 million to really upgrade all of our aquatic facilities, that took some time to evolve in the CIP. It moved around at different times because of how project development was going. So it can be fairly dynamic, but we have to have a good place to start. The council members want to be able to count on what's going to happen across the city and just have some fairly good idea of when that timing is going to be. So it's a big, big part of what we do.
So in your 27 years, has anything ever popped out as really surprising you as far as one of these projects that just exceeded expectations, or frankly, after that 5 years, didn't make it to the 10 years? Anything stick out that?
You know,
not to throw curveball questions, but
it's
it'd
fine.
be
and one of the
interesting.
things we're going to talk about, and I was kind of talking about some of the projects that we work on. You know, I mentioned that we do these little sewer projects and big transportation projects. So, you know, one project I would mention in particular is the Lincoln Street Dam.
Yep.
And so that kind of came, we knew there were some issues there with the bridge and the dam itself. The problem was they were together as one. Over the course of time, we realized that they needed to be separated. It was a huge undertaking, working with environmental agencies at the state and federal level. That had a really, really big impact on several years of the CIP and having to move some things around because of the ultimate cost. You know, I think that project probably ended up being around $17 million, which was a lot more than we ever expected it to be. But we did the right thing. I'm confident of that for long-term development of the river corridor and all those things, and replacing an old bridge. Some of those things can kind of come about that you weren't planning on being quite that size. I think the water and treatment plant, the improvements to the sewer treatment plant, none of that was a surprise, but it's such a big effort. It really takes a lot of communication, coordination amongst everybody with the city council to figure out how those best fit. You know, because that impacts the rates. There's a lot of funding sources in the capital improvement program. On the utility side is primarily funded by the ratepayers, right? Most of our road and bridge projects, almost all of them, are funded by the local sales tax that went into effect in 1985, the Sedgwick County sales tax. That funds a lot of our transportation improvements along with some of those outside sources. But then we've got general obligation funding, which is our general fund, typically backed by property taxes. So there's a lot of moving parts that go into that CIP, but it's really important to what we do.
I don't know how you guys did this before spreadsheets.
Yeah, no, you know what?
It sounds complex.
Yeah, it is. One more thing I might mention real quick, two things that we do within engineering is support the development community. Mm-hmm. So we do something in Wichita not a lot of our communities do that I think has really helped our growth, and provide special assessment funding for extension of all public infrastructure, water, sewer, drainage, paving. So we have staff that spends a lot of time just on that, and it's something that's worked really well. We work closely with Wichita Area Builder Association with local developers, and so that's a really important part of what we do.
And that's unique. We're one of the few cities that do that, I believe, in our, I guess, our sister city or comparable cities group. Could you expand on that? So we will carry the cost of specials to help promote more home building.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that it?
So anywhere developers plat a new area and want to come in and develop and build new homes, we provide the ability by special assessment, if they so choose. They submit petitions. That's everything, a process we go through that almost weekly at the council. One of the items I present is approval of the petitions, and that's for that special assessment process to build new infrastructure. And typically it's over 15 or 20 years that homeowners are able to pay off their portion of that assessment. It's assessed proportionately. But you know what? I've seen, again, in my time with the city, it's been big for the city's growth. And what helps too, even within our core area, you'll find some areas that back when the regulations didn't require it with building, now you can't build a new house without extending city services. It kind of makes sense. There's some areas that we're already in. If they want to do the same, they can do that by special assessment. It makes it typically easier for them financially to be able to do that. I think it's been a great resource.
Oh, and it keeps I believe the cost of houses, because it's not being rolled into the cost of houses. It's something that folks pay us, and then once it's done, it's done.
Yeah, it is. And again, there's not a lot of people that do that. I think it's been a really good thing for us. One other thing I'll mention real quick that I do myself is I am the city's ADA coordinator for the Americans with Disabilities Act. I previously had a staff member that did that had some unique experience, and now I've taken that over. And I've been involved with some things related to ADA over my time in design and construction, but there's been a lot of it that I've learned over time. I've got a real good resource in our law department, but I've worked a lot with the county. I've worked with Envision. I've worked with some members of our community who are advocates for ADA. And it's been something I've really enjoyed. I don't know that the role's going to stay with me, but it's something that I do now, and we'll see where that goes.
Well, it's incredibly important. The American Disabilities Act, for folks who might not be up to date on what that is, the American Disabilities Act, it was, I think, signed into law in the 90s. And it's a civil rights act, pretty much. The goal is to ensure that folks who qualify or have a disability are able to have access to our sidewalks, are able to have access to public accommodations. And when I speak with folks who, let's say, are in a wheelchair, they will tell me if there is construction and it shuts down this one sidewalk that's by my house, my entire world shut off. Or if the sidewalk isn't up to ADA standards, they can't use it safely. In your work, your job is to not only make sure that we have the best roads in the country, but to also make sure that our citizens can utilize our sidewalks, even if they're in wheelchairs.
It is, and that's a big part of what we do through the project development process and through design. And then obviously at some point in time when we take over maintenance, right? Because a lot of these issues come about later, depending on how certain things are maintained. Just a quick example, one of our challenges with sidewalk is by local ordinance, the sidewalk is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner to maintain. And so sometimes those things come about, and generally they get worked out. But yeah, it can be a lot of work, but it's something that's important to us. We want to keep going. I work closely with, we've got the legal staff that's experts on this. We've got staff with transit who have knowledge specific to ADA related to public transportation. We've got staff in our human resources that deal with accommodations with hiring. And so I try to kind of hold it all together. I'm not sure that I'm an expert in any area, but I think we've done a pretty good job of moving forward. And so maybe at some point in time somebody else will do that, but I'm going to keep doing that for now.
We appreciate the work you're doing in that area. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. On this day, your 27th anniversary, how many years out of your career has Kellogg gone without having any construction on?
So actually none. To give you some quick history, in 1985 there was a referendum that Sedgwick County voters passed, a 1-cent sales tax referendum, and half of that when it was approved, was to go to offset property taxes, which has been doing it since then. And the rest of it, there's a split between the city and the county. And the commitment from the city was to use that for freeway improvements primarily. And so starting in 1990, we started making improvements to Kellogg. Anybody familiar with, and I kind of remember some of this as a kid because I grew up in Newton. Most of it was just at grade. There was a stoplight every couple blocks. You know, it just took a while to get through. And the idea was to make that a 6-lane freeway, right? Grade separated freeway at the interchanges so that you could continue on the highway. You could still get off at interchanges. So anyway, starting in 1990 towards downtown, we started progressing. Just last year, we finished work on Far East Kellogg out towards K96. And what that did from Webb Road to K96 was built interchanges at Webb Road and Greenwich both. Prior to doing that work, the intersection of Webb and Kellogg had the highest crash rate of any intersection in the city. And so what happens is when you've got 75,000 vehicles a day on Kellogg and 60,000 on Webb that are all coming together at the same intersection, there's going to be problems, right?
Yeah, you gotta have an engineer looking at that.
Right, so the goal is what we call grade separation, right? And we're not the only ones that do this. In a lot of major cities, as they have grown, have made freeway improvements like this. So we finished it almost a year ahead of time on this last part of this project. And that was the first time I happened to be talking to some people and came to the realization in probably since 1990 that we didn't have some level of construction going on East Kellogg. And I'll tell you, there's been some gaps over time. It probably didn't feel like it to a lot of people. A lot of times people ask, why has it taken so long? And here's the main reason why, is the funding. Even with that local sales tax in place, up until this last phase, which I'll talk about in just a minute, all of those improvements were funded by the city of Wichita. So we have spent $600 million, give or take, in that local sales tax since 1990 to make the improvements that people see. Well, that's not just cash in hand, right? Most of our local sales tax that come in now, or had been, is going to debt service to pay off the bonds from building previous projects. So we kind of had to build up funding to be able to keep going. And so there's always been a lot of concern about why does it take so long. Well, that's really the reason why. But these projects are complex, they're challenging to design, they're challenging to build. Give you a quick example. When you take a roadway underground effectively, it's a little bit of a challenge to deal with drainage, right? The water's got to have somewhere to go. That's always been a big thing that we've looked at. There's a lot of utilities, private utilities in the corridor we got to deal with. Anyway, all of those things take time. But right now, there is no construction going on East Kellogg. And, you know, we put some things out there on social media, and it was kind of interesting to see because some people drove.
Those took off.
They did.
Social media folks were very happy about this.
And I saw some people that drove the corridor and did a time lapse, and it showed no, because I don't think they believed, but we knew, at least for a short time, that there was no construction going on. So this last phase, we were fortunate to receive around $150 million in funding through what was the T-Works highway bill at the time from KDOT, and that really helped because at the time the city was not going to be able to move forward with those improvements.
That's state level money, and that makes sense because here in Wichita, we put a lot of money into the coffers of the state because we're the largest city. So it's I remember thinking when we were getting that money in for or finishing this, knowing that it was coming in from the state pot of money, where it's about time. You know, Wichita should get their fair share. And it's funny you mentioned folks were driving through Kellogg to trust but verify our claim that there was no construction, because then you had the same folks who were actually getting pulled over. Like our police social media folks were tweeting out, make sure you drive carefully, because I guess people were testing out Kellogg without any construction, just a little too fast.
They probably were, because you know now we've got 17 to 18 miles of freeway. The traffic signals go from 119th Street West now to 143rd Street East. That's the first time you see it. So I think that's roughly 18 miles now of completed freeway. And you know, it's taken some time, but overall it's been good.
So I love that Kellogg right now is construction free, because as you mentioned, that's something I think people have just thought about for a major part of their lives. Over 30 plus years I think that we've had, or almost 40 years I think that we've had construction on Kellogg. Right now we have no construction. However, we have this cone here as kind of a reminder that you can't keep our roads pristine without continuously improving them. So we're probably going to have, in the near future, more improvements on Kellogg. Can you talk to us about when some of that construction might begin and where it's going to be?
Sure. So KDOT made an announcement a couple of weeks ago, prior to the holidays, about the current IKE transportation plan, which was a follow-up to T-Works that I talked about, is a rolling program. And so historically in the past, what they would do is put in a set number of projects for 10 years, and it didn't allow much flexibility. It didn't allow for things to change, kind of like I talked about with development of our capital improvement program. If things change in the middle, you're a little bit stuck because it takes time to develop these projects. So what they've done is develop this rolling program. They reevaluate every couple of years, and every 2 years they talk about putting new projects into the pipeline. So they announced that the next phase of East Kellogg was going into the pipeline, and it would go from K96 to just east of 159th Street East. So we've got a real issue at the 143rd Street intersection right now with a lot of traffic that gets there at the same time. And you know, with that connection, especially between us and Andover, and there's more development happening. It seems like out on that area on the east side of Wichita, you got Southeast High School to the south. There's a lot of residential development happening there. And so we've seen over time, as we made freeway improvements, that the traffic counts will actually increase, and we've seen that already happen at 143rd. So there's people with a lot of delays, sitting and waiting. You know, KDOT Secretary Lorenz always talks about quality of life. And it's not so much just entirely a traffic issue and building new roads, but people shouldn't have to sit in traffic when they're trying to get home, right? And that's one of the things we're trying to work on. But also, when you get more and more traffic sitting and waiting, people will get impatient. You will start to see an increase in crashes for those reasons. Add more traffic, it's bound to happen. So it'll be good. So that'll be a grade separated interchange at 143rd, same at 159th, 6-lane freeway. Because we're actually starting to get into Butler County and Andover, there will have to be some coordination between all of us on the local share. There's always a local partnership as part of the funding that has to be provided. So all of us will have to figure that out. But I think right now construction's planned to start in 2023, so it's going to move fairly quick and be done by 2025.
You mentioned a good thing. It's not just the traffic and the annoyance of sitting in traffic, but also the safety. And I'm not sure if, and it's worth repeating, I'm not sure if everyone realizes that where we have more traffic, we do have more collisions. And rather that's folks that maybe on their phones or get distracted while they're sitting there, but in the end, this is about safety as well, not just quality of life. And
yeah, it is. And you know, I talked before about Kellogg and Webb and separating all that traffic. It's the same thing here, and safety is paramount to us. It's one of the first things we look at when we work with KDOT and we talk about funding that we're looking at for making these improvements. So.
Well, Gary, we just got a few minutes left. Just in addition to Kellogg, big topic, in addition to roads in general, what other projects you got coming up?
So in 2022, I'll just run through a quick list. We're working on some more traffic signal optimization in our downtown on the Douglas corridor. We're going to be replacing...
Does that mean the mayor, when I go to work, is going to recognize my car and allow me...
You know, we've talked about that over the years, about making sure the mayor and the city manager had a button they could push, and maybe that's a good idea, but it's supposed to work better for everyone.
Oh, okay.
We're going to be replacing the Amidon Street Bridge over the Arkansas River. Construction's underway on Pawnee from Webb to Greenwich. We've got a large sewer that's been under Interstate 135 for some years that's old. It was actually in place before the highway was built at the south end of town. We're getting ready to relocate that. We have our annual Outsource Pavement Preservation Program. We got 5,100 lane miles of streets, and it is specifically focused to taking care of our existing assets. We're working on a multimodal transit facility near the stadium that we received a federal grant for that will replace the transit center that's downtown. We've got some bike path and pedestrian improvements in the Delano area and on McLean. We worked with a developer on K42 at 235 and were able to secure some KDOT cost share funding, which they call, which is a really looks at public-private partnerships, right? And making turn lane improvements there. And we've got a couple of traffic signal projects on North Ridge Road and 21st and Broadmoor that we'll be constructing in 2022 also.
Well, that sounds like a lot on your plate, Gary, and that's why we're glad you're working here. We're glad to have you for 27 years today. Looking forward to the next 27 years. Just thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for watching this episode of What's Up Wichita. If you want to ask a question on next month's show, please feel free to send us a short video at social@wichita.gov. Thanks again for joining us.
Any of the potholes we encounter are potentially hazardous. Our goal in patching them is first and foremost to eliminate the immediate hazard as quickly as possible. After we receive the complaint, a supervisor will go out and take a look at it and see what all needs to happen to get it fixed. We'll dispatch our crew out, and they'll show up, and the first thing that they do is they'll clean out the pothole, make sure there's no dust, loose debris, that kind of thing. And then they'll sweep it out and blow it out, and then they'll apply a thin layer of tackle to really help that cold patch or hot mix bond to the existing road. Usually takes a few minutes depending on the size. However, some of them are so big that we can't just do a quick repair on it. So those can take several hours and sometimes even several days. Typically we run 2 to 3 crews, and they're running a pre-assigned route, and they're just kind of on patrol throughout the city. Typically in a given year we'll do about 66,000 patches just like this in a given year. By keeping up with them, we were able to bolster the overall condition of the city's street network. The longer a pothole remains in place and unrepaired, the worse it can get. They can either call our direct number, which is 316-268-4013, or they can hit us up on Access Wichita if they want to submit it online. And once we get that request, we try to address it as soon as we can.